Always
Yeah.
wanted to do something like that. It'd be a real cool thing.
Hi, this is Tom McCubbin. It's August the 29th, 2010. I'm in Pocatello, Idaho, and Sister Janis and I are at the site of a full-scale replica of Fort Hall, which was an old fur trapper fort built in the 1830s on the Snake River in southern Idaho. And we're here kind of trying to understand the history of our great-great-great-great-grandfather Thomas Jefferson Shadden, who we knew stayed in this fort when his wagon train came in overland across America from Missouri to Oregon. And he stopped at Fort Hall, and it's recorded that he spent some period of time here. I'm not sure how much time, but he was with the wagon train of 1842 that was captained by Dr. Elijah White. There was about 125 people in the wagon train of 1842, and it was the second wagon train into Oregon. The first wagon train into Oregon only had about 10 or 12 people on it. So when Shadden came over, this was very pristine country around here, and a lot of Shoshone Indian culture that Shadden mixed himself up with while he was here. And so this museum is actually given a lot of good history of what the country was like when the fort was in existence. Of course, the fort was destroyed. 1859, though, a fort was abandoned, and it was completely destroyed by the early 1900s. And since the original fort is on Indian reservation land, you can't really go back and visit the fort anymore. It's not there, and it's on Indian land. So they reconstructed the fort here, about 15 miles away from the original site. But it's quite identical. We've looked at all the sketches from the original fort, and we can tell that this is exactly what it looked like when the Shaddens were here in 1842. I think what I'd like to do,
Oops.
I'd like to sit down cross-legged.
Beyond, I don't know.
I'm going to stop it.
Green. What did I do?
I don't know, let me get this in.
Has it been on all that time? I had three.
Okay, so what I'd like to talk about just a little bit is what Fort Hall was all about and why the Shaddens were here in 1842 on their wagon train, immigrant trail. The fort had actually been built by an American by the last name of Wyatt. I've forgotten his first name, but he was in competition with the Hudson Bay Fur Trader Company to get furs, beaver furs, and other kinds of hides and stuff as well, and trade them for goods. And so he had set up this post, and it was like kind of like the Walmart of the 1840s. It was a place where people could come and exchange goods. And so it was part of the original wagon train trail of 1842. The scouts brought people here so they could stop and rest on the banks of the Snake River, feed their horses. There's a blacksmith shop inside of the fort. They could repair any broken iron pieces that were on their wagon. They could put new shoes on their ox. And yes, these wagons, we found out, were pulled by oxen, not by horse, not by mule, not by cow or whatever. They were pulled by oxen. And the oxen had very thin hooves, and so those hooves needed to have new shoes put on them. So we imagined that here at Fort Hall would be where the Shaddens would have reshoed their oxen. This was also a trading post for fur trappers. So there was like a rendezvous of other early explorers of the Pacific Northwest were around here, and I think this is where Shadden met some of the people that he would later on go into California with when he left from Yamhill County, Oregon, around McMinnville, down to Sutter's Fort in 1843. That party was one of the first parties into California, and it was with some of the same members of the party that had come here from Missouri to Fort Hall. So it was kind of a stopping point. It was like a gathering place for many different people that were wandering around the country.
It has to be real simple, real clear, real big, real colorful. Real black and white. So Ellen Shadden and Ira Bell lived here as the Bell, Mr. and Mrs. Bell. They lived here in Lapwai, at Fort Lapwai here in Lapwai, Idaho. This is on the Lewis and Clark expedition trail down the Clearwater River. Tom and I have been on a journey down the Lewis and Clark expedition trail for the past 10 days, and we've stopped here at Fort Lapwai to see where our great-great-grandmother was buried. Hopefully there's a pioneer cemetery around this fort. It's on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, and across the parkway, which Tom will show you here in a second, is the Nez Perce Wild Animal Management Service. This square behind Tom's white truck there was the officers' homes all around the square, and the Indian tribes were residing across on that mountaintop. If you look, Tom, if you would just show that camera across that, over on that mountain, there's a river, the Clear Water River flows right through Lapwai, and the Indian teepees, you can see in the old photographs, were all around the river. And this fort was to protect the Nez Perce Indian Reservation from immigrants that were trying to illegally settle on the Indian lands. This was for the Indian. And so we're thinking that because Ellen Shadden's parents were murdered in California, and she was rescued by the U.S. Cavalry, taken back to Idaho for her parents. We know that Ira also was a descendant of a military family, so perhaps they were here with the U.S. Cavalry, protecting the Indian lands and being employed by the U.S. Cavalry is kind of a hunch. We're going to look around today and see if we can find any clues to their life here. Okay, we've stepped back about 100 feet from the fort so you can get a better view of this old Victorian officers' headquarters here at Fort Lapwai. This is where the officers were housed as they monitored this Indian reservation. And Lapwai, as I came into town this morning, I actually saw that Lapwai meant butterfly. And I thought that was a sweet name for this little Indian reservation. It's fresh, it's clean, it's near the water. It's surrounded by beautiful, fertile mountains. And you still see a lot of Indian homes around the river. A lot of trucks, a lot of wild animals, little children. It's a small, quiet little town with a deep, rich history, and it's just a privilege to be here.
Okay, we're up in the mountains above Lapwai, Idaho. We've come up on a dirt road about 2 miles out of town. As you can see, the little town of Lapwai is down there in that canyon. And of course, we are wandering around trying to get some kind of sense of where our great-great-grandmother Ellen Shadden Bell and her husband Ira Bell are buried. And we know it's somewhere in Lapwai, Idaho, or thereabouts. We talked to an Indian, older fella, maybe 50, 60 years old, who was riding around on a lawnmower this morning, and he told us that up in these hills around here, there are all kinds of small cemeteries where settlers and cavalry people were buried long ago. And he said they're scattered everywhere. He said there was one up near the high school, which we've been looking for. We have not been able to find it. But we did find, over that way about a mile on either side of this mountain, we did find one. But it was on private property, and we were getting some stink eye from some other people, and so we didn't really want to go up there. We understand that that the grave of Ellen Shadden is unmarked anyhow, so we wouldn't really know for sure whether or not we even found it, if we did find it. So we're just guessing. We're just kind of out looking. But we have been told that there is a big museum, cemetery, and native cultural interpretation center down in Spalding, which is about 3 miles out toward the main highway. So you know, we're never really going to find her here, we don't think. So we're just showing what the countryside looks like, what the people are telling us around here, you know, and just want to have some kind of record of the fact that we've been here. It's a beautiful place. The Indian told us that it is a sanctuary, a banana belt. He said they don't really have winter in here. It gets a little bit cold in the winter, but all the storms apparently just pass on through and they leave this area protected. And it reminds me quite a bit of Nichols Canyon in Milton Freewater, where our grandpa Ted Walden lived for many, many years on the Walla Walla River. It has that same kind of feeling about it. The high mountains, the plunging canyons, the little river. And we actually drove up, I guess that would be south of Lapwai, about 2 miles, and found a little village up there across the river called Sweetwater, Idaho. And we drove around and looked at it. It was really pretty, and there's a couple old farmhouses back in there. You know, it's a shame that we can't locate exactly where Ellen Shadden was and what she was doing, but we're getting some sense of it, some sense of the beauty of the place, so we're enjoying the trip.
I'm in the middle of the Rocky Mountains on an Indian reservation at an old fort. Oh, are you documenting this?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Today is Sunday, August 29th, 2010. I'm dressed in a Shoshone princess garment. We're in Pocatello, Idaho at Fort Hall. Tom is videotaping me, and we're looking for historical records on the early Oregonian wagon trail. And the Shoshone are known for their beautiful beadwork on their dresses. They're world famous for their beadwork. So I'm getting to model this today. We're on the Snake River, and it's just beautiful out today. And I've got some little granddaughters up in Seattle, and I hope they get to see their grandma in a beautiful Indian squaw dress. And your ancestors, Madeline and Caitlin, were on this Oregon Trail, and your grandma's here. And when you grow up, either I'm going to bring you here and show you this place, or you can come yourself as soon as you learn to read and write and enjoy this. There's a lot of things here for a lot of little girls to learn about. And your great-great-great-grandmothers were on this trail, and someday you're going to be here too. And David and Daniel and Andy, you need to be here too. See where your ancestors came from. Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit more about our grandfather, Thomas Jefferson Shadden, and what he was doing here at Fort Hall. there's not a lot of written record of what he in particular did. But we've heard from our other relatives who've done some research a few interesting facts. So I'd like to just kind of put those out there, and I'm saying that this is not documented anywhere that I know of. It is what we've heard to be true, and so it seemed like the appropriate place to be standing or sitting and talking about what happened here with the Shaddens. So when they got here, they had just come through Yellowstone, which is about, not too far east of here, 150 miles east of here. They'd gone through Yellowstone, and Shadden just loved looking at the wild animals. There were moose and elk and bear and all kinds of big, magnificent land animals around here, and he loved looking at them. And I'm sure that he saw, when he got to Fort Hall, I'm sure that he saw more of them grazing along the banks of the river. And he loved horses, and he had probably had several pack horses along with him on the trail. I would imagine he had them tied up behind his Conestoga wagon or his prairie schooner. And anyhow, supposedly the story goes that when he was at Fort Hall, he befriended the Shoshone Indians, who were very friendly, and he traded one of his ponies for a Shoshone Indian boy, a little baby. And he raised that child up until the age of it, until it was 30 years old. And so that would have meant that he would have gone to California with that boy, probably, and then back up to Yamhill County, up to McMinnville with that boy. So that Shoshone Indian boy grew up with the Shaddens and traveled from Fort Hall with them for the rest of their journeys throughout the Pacific Northwest. And the other thing that we've heard about Shadden is that there was some kind of negotiations that needed to be settled, peace negotiations, with some Indians that didn't really like the idea of settlers coming through their land. I think this was Shoshone Indians. The Oregon Trail hadn't really opened up yet. It hadn't really started, so they hadn't really ever seen very many white men. And they were a little bit freaked out about it. They didn't know if they had controlled the land themselves or quite what the situation was. But Shadden apparently had very good diplomacy skills and was able to explain to them that they were settlers, that they were harmless, that they were friendly, and the police let their wagon train go through. The Shoshones admired Shadden. They gave him gifts, some kind of maybe honorary membership of the tribe or whatever, plus the fact that he had one of their children. And they actually gave him a title of Chief Graybrow. And we don't know exactly why. I'm suspecting that at a very young age he went gray and that he had big, heavy eyebrows. Now, he was born about 1810, and this was 1842, so he would have been about 32 years old, maybe 31, when he was here at Fort Hall, which seems like a kind of a young age to have big, heavy gray eyebrows, and maybe that was a very distinctive feature. We don't know. But it must have been something that was very obvious to the Shoshone Indians, and that's why they named him Chief Graybrow. And so that's the story. That's really about all that we know about him being here at Fort Hall. And I wish that we could find out more. We've asked some questions to the curators of the museum here. They don't know much more really than what the museum exhibits themselves show. But we did jot down the names of a couple of books, and we looked at some old maps, and so we're hoping to be able to find out a little bit more about what the Shaddens did here. But for the record, this is all we know right now, is what we're saying here in front of the camera, so that's it. These are some buffalo that they have in a fence by the old Fort Hall Replica Museum. That's the Rocky Mountains in the background. If I can get some of that. That's the Rockies. There's also some elk in here. I'll try to get a picture of them too. That's an elk. Hello. Yeah, he's having a good time.
should donate one.
I bet there is one out there, I bet.
Those tree branches and there's just no difference.
Yeah.
For the buffalo, he just went running over the...
This is about September the 3rd, 2010. I'm in Lapwai, Idaho, with my sister Janis. We've been on a road trip now for about 9 or 10 days, and we wanted to come to Lapwai because we knew that our great-great-grandmother, Ellen Shadden, who married Ira Bell, lived in this town of Lapwai and is buried in Lapwai. So we just wanted to come and look at Lapwai. We don't know much about what they did when they lived here, but we wanted to just come and look at the town. And this old building is an old military fort, and it has a little placard in front of it that I'm going to read from. So this placard says, Fort Lapwai, unlike the forts of popular fiction surrounded by a stockade with blockhouses at every corner, Fort Lapwai was typical of army posts across the West. Established in 1863, the fort was intended to protect ne per se land from illegal settlers trespassing on the reservation. Council meetings were held here on the parade grounds to negotiate problems resulting from the Treaty of 1863, but U.S. government and ne per se perspectives remained far apart. Soldiers from this fort marched toward Whitebird and fought the first battle of the 1877 war. Fort Lapwai functioned as base of operations for the duration of the war. There's a couple of quotes here, one from General Howard. He's saying, 20 times over you repeat that the earth is your mother and about chieftainship of the earth. Let us hear it no more, but come to the business at once. That's a quote from General Howard. And then we have a quote from Hemin Max, which is Yellow Wolf, and he says, in peace councils, force must not be talked. It was the same as showing us the rifle. And it's got some pictures here of the way, the layout of the land, the way it used to look.
Good morning. It's September 4th, 2010, and I am Ellen Shadden's great-great-granddaughter. I'm in Lapwai, Idaho, at Fort Lapwai, and we are Tom and I are trying to locate where Ellen Shadden was buried.